grassroots nonprofit organization that advocates for policies empowering everyday Asian Pacific Islander Nevadans. Nevada is home to a growing APIA community, accounting for 1 in 10 voters. We are One APIA Nevada. Counsel Incorporated is Nevada's premier Democratic campaign firm, fighting for progressive issues and candidates for over a decade, and proud sponsor of Battleborn Progress.
This episode of Out in Front brought to you by
Counsel Inc., Nevada State Education Association, One APIA Nevada, Silver State Voices, and Stefan and Marta Schmidt, as well as our episode sponsors, Save Lives Nevada and Washoe Education Association.
All right, welcome back, everyone, to Out in Front with Annette. My name is Annette Magnus, and I'm the Executive Director of Battleborn Progress. We are so excited to have this incredible panel of experts today to talk to us about the climate crisis. As you all know, I believe that the crisis is real, and I hope all of you do too, because we are living through some epic times with wildfires, a water crisis. We are seeing all kinds of different things that are impacting our communities, especially our communities of color all across this state. We have some amazing guests on tonight who are going to talk about that and more. So I want to welcome them to the show. Our first guest, who is such an incredible person, his name is John McNamara. He is the operations chief of the Reno Fire Department, and we are so excited to have him. We also have Councilman Devin Reese from the city of Reno, one of my dear friends. We've worked together for a very long time. We're excited to have him as well. Also, someone we've wanted on this show for a very long time, Dr. Kirsten Avery. She is the senior climate advisor in the office of Governor Sisolak. We have Brian Beffert, one of my longtime friends who we work together on so many different things. Brian is the director of the Sierra Club Toyabe chapter up in Northern Nevada. And last but certainly not least, one of my other longtime friends, Cynthia Moore. She is the environmental justice coordinator for Make the Road Nevada. I want to thank you all for joining us tonight. We have an incredible panel. So if y'all have questions at home, put them in the chat. We want to hear from you tonight on this incredibly important topic that's going to be impacting all of us for years to come. So, John, I want to bring you in first. First of all, thank you for the work that you do, and thank you for joining us. You have been doing work to fight fires up in Northern Nevada for a very long time now. We're currently seeing the Oak Fire continuing to plague Mariposa County, California. In your career, what have you seen change with regards to the fire activity in Northern Nevada, in Northern California? Because we know that smoke is a huge problem and there's so many other impacts to our communities.
Well, thank you for having me on. So I've been with Reno since 1999. I started my career in California in 1995 with CAL FIRE. Since 1995, it's definitely, a noticeable change in fire behavior, fire season. Right now, the Oak Fire, I just looked, it's just under 20,000 acres. When I first started, like a 20,000 acre fire was considered a career fire. The 100,000 acre, 200,000 acre, last year we hit the Dixie Fire just under 1 million acres. So that's become the new norm. Especially now with the smoke. Every year is, we get blown in with the smoke that comes over the hill. So I have 2 nephews that work for CAL FIRE now. Last year was my youngest nephew's first season. He saw more fire in one season than I did in 4 years with CAL FIRE. So just the amount of fires, the size of the fires, and just the destructive, nature as I was looking at the top 20 fires in California. Out of the top 20 in size, 19 of them have been since 2003. So, it's pretty obvious. And then a huge thing now for us is we don't really have a fire season. I used to get hired in June and laid off in October. With Southern California was always the kind of outlier with the Santa Anas. But for the most part, we fought fire from maybe May till October with the occasional November fire. You look up here in Reno, just since the first call-in fires, our most destructive fires have been November, October, and January. So that for us has probably been one of the biggest things for us in Northern Nevada is fire season is pretty much year round now.
Yeah, I think that's one of the scariest parts. And one of the things, so it's funny because some of the folks in the chat are commenting on this. I just got back from doing a tour of the national parks on the East Coast. But last year, me and my husband had the privilege of going to all of the national parks in California. And we went right before the big fires happened in the Lassen National Park and around that area. So we saw just complete devastation with that fire. Now we're seeing something similar with the fire near Yosemite National Park. So talk to us about the difference between one of these career fires or a mega fire and what would happen prior to this before temperatures were rising and we were in drier climates and things like that.
So, the mega fire, it's not really a true scientific definition of it, but I know that Dixie was the first recorded fire that started on the western slope of the Sierras and burned all the way across the eastern slope. The Caldor fire was the second fire to do that. I think one of the biggest changes now is, and the Forest Service has taken a huge hit on this. They used to allow fires that were started with lightning. They would manage them. There are certain areas that fire is still good. Fire is a tool. The problem is now is you cannot let any of those fires that before would creep and, burn for a month, send up a little bit of smoke and do good. It's pretty hard to allow those fires to continue anymore because of the conditions, because of the climate change and, the population. So we've lost that tool to effectively let fire do its job. So I was not on the Dixie fire. I was on the Beckworth fire, which burned around Frenchman's Reservoir. And just on that one, like I said, I've been doing this. I'm 49. I've been doing this since I was 21. As just the fire conditions I've saw on the Beckworth fire and on the Tamarack on the Caldor, I've never seen before. So, just like I said, the fire behavior has definitely intensified. And like I said, it's, a 50,000 acre fire is huge, and now barely makes the news. The Oak fire is 20,000 acres. The previous fire by Yosemite was about 20,000 acres. Kind of interesting fact, the Oak fire, I think, lost a lot of its steam because it burned into the Ferguson fire burn scar from 2018. So I think that fire would have done a lot more, but they had I think the Ferguson was a couple 100,000 acres as well. So it's kind of interesting to see a lot of the fires that really have taken off have died off after lots of hard work and money thrown at it, but also they're running into more and more burn scars, which I find kind of interesting.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I just saw a comment in the chat, and it's a question for you, John, but it was actually a question that I had as well. So this question comes from Shelby. And Shelby says, can you explain how fire does a good job? Like, how can it be productively used? And I took a class at UNLV on natural resource management. And our professor, Professor Parker, he told us that one of the actual biggest problems is that we are not allowing fires to burn anymore and allowing fires to do their kind of natural job, which was to burn that underbrush, take care of some of the hotter burning, items in the forest, and also help regrow trees like the giant sequoias that rely on fire for regrowth. So talk to us about that natural pattern that is no longer able to happen and why fire is actually good.
So the slow burning cool fires, they burn at a slow rate of spread. They take care of the ground material, all the down pine needles, down limbs, things like that. When those fires are allowed to just do their own thing, they take care of all the understory. I was on the Caldor in the El Dorado National Forest, and I was just amazed they take care of all the understory. I was on and some areas it's 3, 4, 5 feet deep. That's just a combination of the feds and the states. They have a ton of money to throw at fire mitigation. The fire prevention budgets have suffered. The control burns don't make the news unless they get out of control. But like I said, the forest managers, they could allow those fires just to burn slow and do their thing. And then the trees, when we're not stressed out in a drought, the trees are fire resistant. I think right now I just got an email from the NV Energy meteorologist talking about the fuel moisture for called 1,000-hour fuels, which is the big heavy timber, and they're at record dry levels. So once again, in a normal year, you could let even a moderately hot fire burn through the area, take out what's necessary, and just leave those healthy trees. But now most of those trees are just standing up like matchsticks because everything is so bone dry. So like I said, we've just lost that ability until we get a couple back-to-back wet winters that keeps everything wet. That tool's just been kind of taken out of our hands. And then add in the political implications in New Mexico. Their biggest fire in state history was started from a control burn this year. Another one, I think, in Arizona, New Mexico, it kicked back up like 3 months later. And so, the things we used to do, we are rewriting the rule books every year in terms of what's allowable and what's not allowable now.
And just for those at home, Chief McNamara has to jump off at 5:30. And so that's why we wanted to make sure to get to his questions. So if you have more questions for him, please put them in the chat. We're going to have him hop in just a few minutes, and then we'll get to our other speakers who are joining us today. So Chief, I want to ask you another question, because I think this is really important, not just for folks up in Northern Nevada, but all across our state, especially with climate change and as fires become more and more a part of our everyday life. How can residents of Nevada, what can they do to secure their property and prepare for possible wildfires in their area? And I would just add to this question, that includes smoke now, because I'm an asthmatic. I have to deal with this every single fire season where there's a fire in Southern California and I'm breathing in that air. How do Nevadans better prepare for these things?
So for the fires themselves, I always tell people, kind of prepare your house as if there will not be a fire engine in front of it to protect your house. The big things are shake shingle roofs. I've a lot of pine needles in the gutters. Take the time, pay someone, do it yourself. The defensible spacing. There's a great organization, Living with Fire, that has really good tips. But just in my experience, I have seen metal houses catch on fire because pine needles are on their roofs. So junipers against the houses it's like vertical gas cans. So, as much as it pains people to cut down their beautiful trees that are right against your house, you need to prepare, like I said, for your house to survive without a fire engine in front of it. During all the fires I was on last year, the fire was burning so hot that we weren't actually doing structure protection. What we would do is let the flame front following. We'd let the fire blow through, and whatever houses were standing, we would put the fire out around them. So you need to, like I said, have your house able to withstand, a firestorm with no one there. Most of the fires, or most of the houses that burn down, they burn down, 6 to 8 hours after the main fire front blows through, where you have embers that are smoldering and junipers, and then the crews move following the flames. There's not very many people left behind, and those fires, the little fires kick up, get in your attic, or just burn up because they're unattended. We don't have enough people to sit on every house. So I always tell people that assume that you will not have help, and make it so your house is able to stand by itself. 30 used to be 30 feet clearance around it. Now they recommend close to 100 feet, which, zero escape. There's a lot of things you can do to still make your house look good. But at the end of the day, like I said, any evergreen trees, pine trees, the junipers, the leaves, the pine needles, all that stuff around, it's just a recipe for disaster. In terms of smoke, N95s, they work. They're originally, before COVID, they were used for filtration for people. We used them on incidents, but also, people use them for industrial purposes. So, as much fun as it is wearing a mask all the time, that's the best thing I can recommend if you go outside is wearing an N95. The smoke settling in, that's a whole nother thing. It's just adding insult to injury in terms of the fires. We feel, and on incidents, we've been on fires before, like in the Klamath National Forest, where the smoke settles in, and they will rotate crews out to the coast for fresh air. So, not everyone has an opportunity to get in their car and leave, but, we recommend trying to get someplace with fresh air or wear an N95.
Thank you for that. And Chief, I just want to say thank you so much for joining us. Before you go, my last question for you tonight is, how can we as Nevadans, as Westerners, really start to adapt to a longer fire season? Because unfortunately, I think this is our future, and I think it's only going to continue to get worse, especially if we're not taking the climate crisis seriously. So is it necessary to put more resources into fire prevention and firefighting efforts? What do you see, and how do we mitigate some of this going forward?
That's a good question. I know the federal government's putting a lot more money into the Forest Service and BLM for prevention. Same with, the state, they're trying their best. Just in Reno itself, we have goats that are grazing in Rosewood Canyon, so we can address that locally in terms of mitigating the things locally. We can't stop lightning from coming through, but we can stop people being careless or we can try to have people stop being careless with fires. Target shooting, believe it or not, target shooting is still a huge cause of fires, and a lot of people don't believe it can happen. It happens, and the ones that we can prevent. It sounds Smokey the Bear. Only you can prevent forest fires. It's truly, we need to be able to take care of the things that we can take care of. And being reckless and being careless. In terms of climate change and just an awareness. Like I said, we used to just take our brush gear off the engines in December because there are no more fires. I think people just need to understand that we live with fire 24/7, 365, unless there's snow on the ground, and even a lot of snow on the ground. We still run that risk of fires, and fire season, like I said, it's year round now. Unfortunately, I think in my 27 years within the fire service that, things have changed, and you can't deny that things have changed. I'll let everyone else debate why. That's not my job. My job is to help prepare our department to tackle the future. Longer fire seasons, more burnout, more injuries, more money. I don't know what the future holds for us other than more of the same, unfortunately. So but I think if we could get a lot more money in prevention and a lot more, like I said, forest management, that would definitely help. But around here, take care of your house, take care of your neighbor, help your neighbors. That clearance around your house is critical for the fast-moving Pine Haven fires, column fires that burn for 12 to 36 hours before the storm. A low-pressure system hits. We have those high winds. Those are the ones that will take out 30 houses and be done in a day. So around here, defensible space and clearance is the key.
Thank you, Chief, and thank you for joining us tonight. We appreciate you and all of the firefighters who protect us every single day. You're amazing, and we are appreciative of the work that you all do. So thank you.
Thank you.
Hopefully you'll join us again.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Awesome. All right, I want to bring in Councilman Devin Reese, one of my favorites. Welcome, Councilman. Thanks for joining us. I know you just came back from an epic vacation, so thanks for being here.
Well, always a joy to hang out with you.
Well, I'm excited tonight. This is our big Northern Nevada special. Me and Cynthia, I think, are the only ones down here in Southern Nevada, so it's great. So I want to talk to you about some of the work that the city of Reno is doing, specifically around a public portal that tracks the city's carbon emissions, which is so incredibly important to this work and to this fight against climate change. How will this help the city of Reno address carbon emissions, and why is this important for Nevadans to know about?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I think I'd start at the beginning, which is in July of 2019, the city of Reno adopted its own sustainability plan, which I think was quite an undertaking, and a lot of credit goes to Suzanne Groneman and the community who lifted that. Certainly the elected officials had to adopt it, but there was a lot of work going on with a lot of community organizing activities, a lot of communities of care, communities that are marginalized, that really were pushing for the adoption of that plan. So as a result of that, the city started to figure out, well, we have this plan, how are we going to do something about it? It can't be enough to have a document that sits on the shelf. And so in small ways, I think, and hopefully in meaningful ways, we've been trying to carry out the goals of that plan. So the one that you're talking about is an effort with a company called N0. I think it was formerly called Ledger 8760. It's in our second year now. And really what it does is it's 329 sites throughout the city where we're tracking the type of emissions and the way in which our carbon footprint impacts our communities. Those sites are located in places like parks and sewers. We're also studying our fleet. So our fleet vehicles in both the fire and police department. And so those are the kind of things we're tracking. And then once we have the data, we now have a year worth of data, we then will be able to sort of take a look at ways we could reduce our carbon footprint. The easiest example that I could give to folks listening is, our unmetered streetlights represent about 23% of our city's total emissions. So what we are doing now is transitioning those to LED lights, and our goal is to reduce those emissions. And I think just in the time that we've started it, it's reduced our emissions by something like 61%. And so it's a small thing in the overall scope, but I suppose everything matters when you're, dealing with a catastrophic global warming, fires, drought. And I think some of it is also just about awareness. It's like situating ourselves as a city to acknowledge the crisis that we have created, and then going after the ways in which we can change it.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Councilman. And for those at home, please be putting your questions in the chat. We want to get to as many questions from the community as possible tonight. So put them in the chat, Facebook, Twitter, Twitch, wherever you're watching, put them in the chat and we will get to as many of them as possible. Also, share this conversation with your friends tonight. We need to be talking about this critical topic of the climate crisis. And so we want to talk to as many folks as possible. So please share this on your social media and with your friends tonight. Councilman, I want to ask you another question. With the city of Reno tracking carbon emissions, is it possible to make more informed choices about the best way to curb carbon emissions and also possibly help with the issue of climate change?
For sure. I mean, again, I think that there is a role that each of us play, right? Battleborn Progress is on the cutting edge of leading the conversations about climate change. There are other groups that are working on the same goal. We are one of the groups that I think is trying to figure out where our space is in the overall equation. Governments are not going to fix what we have all wrought, but they have a role to play in undertaking some of the change necessary, and we can be leaders. You look at our city's efforts to relief Reno, for example, so an increase in our tree canopy. That's directly related to the heating that's going on, and we're one of the fastest, if not the fastest growing cities in America. We've just recently gone through a micro-mobility study and brought in e-scooters to the community for the first time. Again, the goal there is a sustainability. We're trying to reduce car use and emissions. We have become recently a bee city, USA. We're a model for bee pollinator communities, and we've launched a couple of community gardens. I am personally working on, with a number of different groups, a project to look at composting. And I hope that in the fall, we'll launch a composting program that'll be on a small scale, probably only in one neighborhood. But it's like everything we can do, we should be doing. Sometimes we don't do it because there's like a lack of political will. Sometimes it's a money issue. Sometimes it's just like inertia. Governments are not very good at being quick or adaptive. And so everything we can do sort of adds a drop to the bucket, which makes up a larger bucket, which makes up the ocean. So we just got to do everything we can with all the effort we can and keep going.
Thank you for that, Councilman. All right, Dr. Avery, I want to bring you into the conversation now. Obviously, you work under the Office of Governor Sisolak. You're the senior climate advisor. So I just want to say thank you for joining us. It's such a critical role at a time like this. So tell us about the work that you're doing with Governor Sisolak and how you plan to address climate change and help the state find solutions to issues such as water usage and the rising temperatures. What is that looking like statewide?
I have to say that's going to be like a 3-word answer, Annette. No problem. No, just kidding. But and I just want to say one thing. I'm actually based in Las Vegas. Most people think I'm up north, but I am actually down south, and so just wanted to mention that. So I'm one of those people.
You're one of us.
I'm one of you, y'all. Exactly, exactly. So we're doing a multitude of things, but right now one of our key priorities is ensuring that all those dollars that are on the table in the infrastructure bill, that we are deploying them into our communities and that they are commensurate with our climate goals, whether that's achieving our greenhouse gas emissions reduction targets or it's ensuring the resilience of our communities. We have a huge transformative opportunity here. I mean, when do we ever say, wow, there's actually money out there and we just don't have enough people to go to get it? This is what we're looking at. And even yesterday, the news coming out of Congress that there could be an agreement on a climate package, those are even more dollars that would fundamentally transform where we're going, which is what we need to do to get to net zero emissions. And so we have a huge opportunity, and that is one of the key things that we're really focused on in the governor's office in the climate space. The other thing that we've started is we launched a climate series. And this is a series of events that we kicked off a couple weeks ago in Reno. And that event was actually focused on wildfire. And we're really focusing in on what are the impacts of climate change that we are seeing now here in our communities. It's not polar bears and penguins. It's right here on our front doorstep. And really telling those stories and how it's impacting people. But in addition, we're also trying to centralize resources. So that way people know if it's hot outside, I need help. Where do I go to find information? Because that information's all over the place. And so we're developing resources on our website, which is climateaction.nv.gov, to really help and support people. And we actually dropped a 1-pager in collaboration with Living with Fire on what households can do in advance to make sure they mitigate their risk with respect to wildfire, but also what are the plans you need to have in place for that immediate response? If you have that home in Collin Ranch and you need, and it's happening, making sure you have a plan for your pet, you have a muster point for your family. Like, what are your plans and what are you going to do? And so I'll stop right there.
I know we can talk about this topic for hours, I feel like. So you have worked extensively on Western water resources in your career. Obviously, as a Westerner, somebody who was born and raised in Las Vegas, something I'm very passionate about and learned a lot about in my natural resource policy class as well. What challenges does the West face in terms of access and availability of water resources in the near future? I mean, I feel like it's every day we're hearing that Lake Mead is just drying up by the minute and we're finding more and more things in there. What are we facing and what is the future for the West when it comes to water policy?
It's not super optimistic, I'll put it that way. If you just look at the news and all the weather that's happening right now across the US, you're breaking heat records. We have record flooding happening at the same time that we have record drought. It is all about intensifying extreme events. That is what climate change is doing. That's what warming the atmosphere does. I think folks probably heard me say this, and I keep repeating it. You warm up the atmosphere, it holds more water. Every degree that the atmosphere warms, it holds 7% more water. And that fundamentally changes the water cycle, which changes everything. It changes the games. The wets get wetter, the dries get drier, and everything is just all gollywampus. And that is a technical term, actually. But truly, we're really seeing that manifest. And, in the north, for example, and I think about the Truckee, you remember when 2017 and 19, and you had those cycles of floods and then drought, floods, et cetera. We're going to see more of that. So we need to make sure that we are resilient to even more intense and extreme events than we've seen in the past. We can't use the past as any sort of analog for the future. And then in Southern Nevada, down here, our water comes from Lake Mead. And I'll tell you, I'm not sure we're going to see a time where there's necessarily more water in the Colorado River. And so we are this is a dire situation. We are in a great position in Southern Nevada relative to other states. I will say that. And that is because the majority of the water that's used in off the Colorado River, it's like over 70% goes to agriculture. And the majority of our water in Southern Nevada, the vast majority, it's household use. And so we're in a better position because of our investments in conservation and because of how we use our water than Arizona and California in terms of cuts and availability of water.
So I actually want to ask you a question on that, Doctor, because this is something I think that people don't understand. Southern Nevada has actually done a very good job in terms of water management. And historically, we were not given a lot of acres per foot because somebody up in Northern Nevada decided to, negotiate our acres per foot originally when the Colorado River was divided up. But a lot of that water does go to the Imperial District in California, where agriculture and a lot of our food comes from. How do we manage that and manage making sure that all communities along the Colorado River still have water to live? Because that is our only source of water currently, unless we start thinking about things like desalination and other things like that.
So, one thing I point out, you're right. And we think about some of the food resources and we need water for our food. But a lot of that water that goes to agriculture is going to alfalfa. And a lot of that is actually being sent overseas. And it's almost a virtual trade of water. And so we're sending water to other countries. And is that really the best use? And so I think we're in this situation right now where the 7 basin states, so just everybody's aware, there's a massive negotiation that is taking place. About a month or so ago, the 7 states, including Nevada, were told by the Bureau of Reclamation that they had to cut their water use, come up with a plan by mid-August of cutting our water use by 2 to 4 million acre feet. Just to give you an idea, we use on the river about 14 million total every year. So that kind of cut. And just last week, the upper basin states said, nope, we're not going to cut anything. The lower basin states have to do it. And so when we come to mid-August, it's essentially we're going to be hearing from the federal government what's going to be happening with respect to the water. And so this is a situation we're in, and I am optimistic that we will get to that moment, that existential moment of, okay, we need to think about water and how we're using it, and conservation needs to be a way of life, even in Northern Nevada. I know that there's, you hear, oh yeah, well, let's start thinking about it now. That way if you're hit with it at some point, you're prepared. And honestly, why not just conserve water? Because it's a good thing to do. I'm a big fly fisher. I'm pretty psyched when there's more water in the river because it's better for the fish. So anyways, I'll just leave that there.
No, I appreciate it. This is, as a Westerner, something I'm very passionate about. And even in grade school, we were taught, turn off the water while you're brushing your teeth. It's something that people in Las Vegas have been dealing with our entire lives. So for me, I have xeriscaping in the backyard. I have, all of the things that you're supposed to be doing. And it would be really great if other people along the Colorado River would get on the bandwagon and do it with us. So I appreciate that. And just so you all know, in the chat, there are some resources that Councilman Reese shared with you. So please look those up in the chat. Councilman Reese, I'm going to come back to you for a few minutes because I want to go back to fires just for a second, and then we'll come to our other speakers. Hang on one second. I'm scrolling through to get back to you because we have a lot of speakers tonight. So in addition to being a Reno City Council member, you are also an attorney for 2 area fire districts. What can you tell us about the prolonged fire season and how that impacts fire departments, which obviously we just heard from? We know it's having drastic impacts on them, but what are you seeing as their attorney?
Yeah, it's a good point. So I represent a number of fire districts in Lake Tahoe. They're small. Generally, they're called 474 fire districts. So they're not attached to a government entity. They are created by statute, and they're related to communities where the people in those communities have voted to have their own fire agency. And so pretty unique among jurisdictions, but small government entities. And for my part, there's just an odd overlap between the federal government lands bill, so SNPLMA, for example, which I know, Annette, you're very familiar with. SNPLMA has created a fairly large pool of money for which to combat wildfires, especially for the Western United States. And so although the Southern Nevada Lands Protection Act created a growth among the service area boundaries for communities, it also created a lot of money that was then used to fund fire and defensible issues related to that. So what I will say is that they just have an odd relationship to one another. And I think with the conversations that are happening in Northern Nevada that are also centered around the public lands bill, there will be an odd way in which they overlap. So that's the first thing. The second thing is just that, we live in communities where some of our most vulnerable are the most impacted by, say, the smoke. So if we have fires in the Sierra Nevadas and those fires fill up our community with smoke, and they have done that for the last 7 or 8 years in a way that is profoundly different than when I have grown up here. I've lived here in Northern Nevada my whole life, and I've never seen it the way it has been the last several years. And the folks that are most folks who have means and resources can leave or go inside, but our most vulnerable communities, our homeless population, children, elderly, they don't have the same opportunities to avoid the smoke. So it comes, it sits in, and creates all kinds of respiratory problems for people. So there's just a lot going on there that you don't think about until it's actually happening. So our fire departments are certainly doing their best to use the funds that they can to reduce the fuels for forest fires. But sometimes it's just an all-out, for them, it literally is a war against nature and oftentimes, of course, human-caused fires.
And in that role, Councilman, are you seeing increased amounts of injuries to our firefighters? Are you seeing people who are being hurt on the job because these fires are so intense? And what are some of the solutions you as maybe a councilman can do to ensure the safety of people who have to go out there and be on the front lines in fighting these fires as they grow in intensity?
Yeah, undoubtedly, because of the nature and the increase in frequency and intensity, there are more injuries to our frontline workers, right? I think the legislature has been trying to address some of those things as it relates to like the heart and lung bill, some of the different things that I know Battleborn Progress has fought for in terms of collective bargaining, because those things relate to how we care for persons who are injured on the job. And so I guess I would say we're fortunate that there have been fewer injuries than you would anticipate. But I'll give you an example. There was a tragic episode last week, and it really implicates our mental health resources for firefighters, where we had a team out on a fire and a helicopter crashed. It crashed into a river. There was crews who were trying to rescue the firefighters who had fallen into the river. And just, you can imagine when you're in either a war zone or fighting a fire, the trauma that you experience is absolutely real and has to be taken into account. So as a city, we're saying to ourselves, do we have the resources to take care of our, first responders when they need and have mental health issues? Are we addressing them? So those are some of the things I think we can do both at the state level that we are doing, that you have led the fight on some of the things at the city level. I think our governor has done an incredible job of saying, here's an issue. I'm going to find the resources to match up with that issue, whether that's resources out of the federal dollars that are coming in, whether that's directing policy choices and changes. We really are very fortunate. We live in a state where there is an acknowledgement of the dangers that these first line responders encounter, and also the way in which climate change is both real and changing the nature of our response. So I think we have it better than some. We can always be better, but I'm thankful that we live in a state where we understand and are making efforts to make changes that we can in the way that fires affect us and they affect our most vulnerable communities.
Yeah, most days I'm just thankful that our governor believes in science and like basic things. So, there's that. Councilman, I want to ask you one other question from the audience. I know you have to hop and then we're going to move to Cindy, but Emily in our audience asks, how else is Reno lowering its carbon emissions? Why are we not pushing better bus routes and teaching my neighbors to ride them? And I think that's a fair question statewide, right? I think statewide, we need to be relying on public transit, bikes, other things far more to really start bringing down emissions and, not just relying on cars to get around.
Yeah, it's a good question. And of course, I think all of us are thinking about the ways in which a car-centric society that we have been can become more people-centric. So I'll give you two examples. One, I think I've already mentioned the micro-mobility project that involves the use of scooters for that last mile. But also we've improved access to bike lanes recently, right? We've taken complete streets and redesigned them so that people can safely bike to where they're going instead of having to ride. Now, the question about buses, I think, is a super important one because it implicates a segment of our community that really needs and relies on that form of transportation. And oftentimes that's elderly, it's our poorest communities, it's, our people of color who are using that system to get where they have to go. And in Reno, and I think this is true for Las Vegas as well, the city of Reno has nothing to do with our bus system. It's its own political entity, the RTC up here. And I know it's similar down in Las Vegas. They are sort of exploring and experimenting with lots of smaller transit operations, almost like Lyft and Uber or on-call shuttles. So some of those big buses are maybe not the best way to do it. And also we've transitioned to up here, emission-free buses, not on every line, but they're working through that. We've got to improve. It's difficult because Westerners, and I think it's sort of tied to our heritage and Western land use ethics, we have wide open spaces. It's very big. And so being able to get from here to Elko or here to Las Vegas, we still have an innate desire to do that. But if we build cities that are more human focused, more human centric, and scaled to the size that human beings can walk, I think you're starting to impact some of those things. So it's you've got to attack all of these issues in ways that you can reasonably do so. So it's micro-mobility, it's bike lanes, it's supporting your rapid transit programs, it's creating zoning opportunities where you're having more of that live, work, play rather than having sprawl going everywhere. There's little parts that just touch on so many issues and we have hours of conversation, but the question was a good one. And I think it behooves all of us to think, critically about how we can be better at supporting large transportation projects, whatever those become, as we get away from being so car-centric.
Thank you so much. And thank you for joining us tonight, Councilman. We appreciate all that you do. And obviously you are welcome back anytime. And we're going to keep going with our other three speakers. I want to move to Cynthia. Cynthia, thank you so much for joining us. You are the Environmental Justice Coordinator at Make the Road Nevada. You do incredible work over there. And obviously you and I have worked together for a long time. Tell the audience about the recent decarbonization report that we worked on with the Breathe Free Coalition that you and I worked together on, and all of the work that's going on in conjunction with it. And why is this a report and moving into a space of decarbonization so important at a moment like this?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me here today, Annette. And it's been a pleasure working with you on this report and being part of the Breathe Free Nevada coalition. This report was put together because in 2019, Nevada set ambitious statewide goals to decrease our greenhouse emissions or greenhouse gas emissions by 28% by 2025. And what this report did was it took a look at how it is that we could reach those goals that were set by our state. And again, like you mentioned earlier, we have a governor that believes in science, and he created the Nevada Climate Initiative, where we were also very active in participating in the various listening sessions. And what this report did, it provides the blueprint for how our state can protect the vulnerable Nevadans living in our BIPOC and frontline communities, because we have a tendency when we look at policies as to how we can move away from gas emissions and more towards electrification. Oftentimes, we don't include the communities that are being affected the most. This report found that communities of color and frontline communities are the ones that are not polluting as much as other communities, but we are being affected by pollution the most. And I can tell you, as someone that lives in a frontline community in East Las Vegas, myself and my neighbors are feeling the effects of what environmental injustice looks like. And this report is very important because it is showing us how it is that we can address those disparities, and how, as we start moving with our state policies, how we can bring everyone with us and not leave anyone behind, and ensuring that everyone has access and is able to breathe clean air regardless of the zip code that you live in.
Thank you for that, Cynthia. And obviously, we know, and we've talked about it with the fires and with our water situation, extreme heat is becoming more of an issue every single year. Warmer nighttime temperatures make it difficult for people to cool off, and it makes it harder for our communities to cool off, especially, like you're saying, in some of those communities of color, maybe who don't have parks and trees and other green spaces where that helps to make that those spaces cooler. So what policies can we implement, in your opinion, that will help low-income residents or communities of color deal with this extreme heat and help to start to mitigate some of those problems that exist with climate change?
Yeah, thank you for that question. There are several things that the report has looked at and is making recommendations on what our leaders here in Nevada can do to help those of us that live in the frontline communities, especially those of us that live in the middle of the urban heat island. They can start looking at providing accessible electric public transit. That way people can get around easily and affordably without needing a car. We are, especially here in Las Vegas, we are very car-centric, and we're not very friendly to public transportation. So that's one of the things that we need to look at, is improving our public transportation, but also making sure that we're electrifying the public transit as we continue to improve. Also, another way to help our Southern Nevada folks and all over Nevada is to help our low-income households switch to efficient electric appliances that reduce energy use and lower utility bills. The other thing is to expand access to energy efficiency and rooftop solar panels, not just to homeowners, but also renters. And I can tell you right here in East Las Vegas, where I live, the majority of my neighbors are renters and they're not homeowners. Therefore, just saying, hey, I want to install rooftop solar in my house is not really a reality for them because they don't own the home, they're renting. The other thing that's really important, because what we're experiencing right now is everything is increasing in prices. I know that my electric bill is much higher right now than it was even a year ago during this time of the year. So one of the things that this report is recommending is that we protect utility customers by limiting bills to a percentage of household income.
Thank you for that. One more question for you, and then I'm going to hop over to Brian for a few minutes. So as more people use their air conditioning, because especially in Vegas, we know right now it is impossible to live without air conditioning. We naturally see the use of more energy. I mean, my energy bill goes up tremendously in the summertime because I cannot live in a hot house. So in places like California, we have seen this leading to rolling blackouts. What steps can Nevada take to avoid this scenario? And I want to flag, last night, while there was a giant, massive storm rolling through Las Vegas, we actually saw blackouts happen because the power went out on the east side, because on the east side, the infrastructure is a little bit older. So what do we need to do to make sure that we're protecting our residents? So especially elderly populations who can't stand the heat that long are protected from things like this.
Yeah, thanks for mentioning that. I was one of those people that was affected yesterday by the storm. Granted, I didn't lose electricity for that long, but it is a trend that we're seeing anytime that it gets really windy in southern Nevada. The older neighborhoods tend to lose their power. And in this extreme heat, and yesterday especially, it was extremely humid, and we're not used to this much humidity. We know that's monsoon season, but it's just hard to live without the air conditioner. And a lot of our neighbors in this right now are having to choose between whether or not they turn on the air conditioner, or like many of us choose, we're fortunate enough that we're able to keep the AC going regardless of what time it is. But I think one of the things that we need to look at is improving our infrastructure, because a lot of the older neighborhoods tend to have their power lines above ground, and the newer neighborhoods have their power lines underground. And that's why anytime there's any storm, anytime it gets really windy, a lot of our neighbors here, especially in the older neighborhoods, lose their energy. And no one should have to sit there and wonder if they're going to have electricity anytime it gets windy. I know for my parents, they're in their 60s now, and that's one of the things that they're always worried about during the summer months, is whether or not we're going to have electricity, or if we're going to have blackouts anytime it's windy.
Absolutely. All right, Brian, I want to bring you in now. Thank you for being patient. We had so many amazing speakers on tonight. I'm trying to get to all of us, so we might go a little bit over. So I appreciate y'all. So I want to talk to you. You are obviously the director of the Sierra Club, and we talk a lot about climate change. You and I have done a lot of work together over the years on various issues as it relates to climate and the environment. So can you speak to the disproportionate impact climate change is having on the low-income communities around the state and people of color, like Cynthia did? I think it's such an important part of this, and it's such an important piece of this topic, because like she said, they're not the ones creating the pollution, but they are disproportionately being impacted with asthma rates and other things that are impacting their health.
Absolutely, Annette, and I'd like to start by thanking you and the Battleborn crew for having me and the other speakers tonight, and for this whole series. I'm learning a lot, and this is a really important conversation, so I really appreciate it. I'm going to answer your question by sharing my screen. I love maps, and I just want to make sure, can you all see that? It looks like a grayish map of Las Vegas.
Yep, we got you.
There it is. So I love maps because they're a really great way of showing us what's actually happening on the ground. And I'm grateful that you're inviting me to speak after you talk with Cynthia, because it's the same conversation. So this is, and I'm up in northern Nevada, but we're going to talk about Las Vegas. So trying to give you some love down there. So this is downtown Las Vegas. The Regional Transportation Commission of Southern Nevada did an amazing map a few years back of the urban heat island. So when you're talking about urban heat in the Las Vegas Valley, this is what it looks like, right? The darker colors are the hotter places. And you also talked about the decarbonization report. And there's some data from that report that's really, well, it's sad, but we're going to throw on top of this urban heat information from this. It's an environmental index from that decarbonization report. And so really what you're looking at with these darker colors is higher concentrations of pollution, higher risks of disease associated. So we're talking about asthma, cardiovascular disease, stroke, lung cancer, premature births and low birth rates, neurological disorders, and then all of this contributes to lost days at school, lost days at work, poorer performance at school, at work, lower earning over lifetime, shorter life expectancy. It's really sad. And then on top of that, we're going to throw just one more layer on, and it gets darker still. And this is from that decarbonization report, a demographic index. So basically, these darker colors show a higher percentage of low income, racial minority, limited education, linguistically isolated, elderly, and young populations. And so what we're looking at here is the impacts of climate change. In fact, just today, there was a study in the Nevada Independent, and I can drop that link in the chat after, that just showed the higher impact of air pollution on communities of color in Las Vegas. And it's hard to go a day or a week without seeing more and more studies of those. And let's also be clear, right? These are the scars of climate change, but they're also the scars of systemic racism. So we're talking about redlining, lack of investment and reinvestment in the downtown areas and communities, white flight, all of those problems. And so it just creates a really complex list of factors that are harming these people. And it's time to bring solutions to those communities who are feeling the impacts first and worst.
Absolutely. And thank you for sharing that, Brian. I think that's such important context to have as we're discussing this. I want to continue this conversation with you because as we look for new ways or more ways to combat the climate crisis, there's obviously a strong push for more electric vehicles, but that comes with its own set of issues, right? And this has had a significant impact on certain tribal communities, specifically the Fort McDermott Paiute tribe in northern Nevada. So how do we balance the need for maybe electric vehicles, hydrogen vehicles, newer technology to move us into the future, not rely on fossil fuels, but also how do we balance those needs with its impacts on tribal communities, on communities of color? Because we can't just go out and rape and pillage the land to get, lithium and put those in cars, because that's no different than what we're doing with fossil fuels at the moment. And I think it's this balance that we need to find. There has to be something better we can do.
Right. And that you're nailing it. And I think it's something that we're all learning and have a lot more to learn about. To be clear, electric vehicles are cleaner than fossil fuels, and we need to get off fossil fuels as quickly as possible. But if we're looking at trying to replace our entire fleet of fossil fuel vehicles with electric vehicles, the lithium and other minerals, and for batteries and all of those technologies that we're going to need, some researchers have anticipated a 500-fold increase in mining here in Nevada and around the world. That means that frontline communities like the folks who live up at Thacker Pass in northern Nevada, but also elsewhere around the planet, as well as wildlife, as well as the aquifers and the native habitats, they're going to face many more challenges than we have today. And so really what we need to do is we need to find ways to use less energy.
Absolutely. And then before I move back to Dr. Avery, Brian, talk about the cost of not doing anything, because I feel like we're at this pivotal moment. I mean, we've been here for years, but we're at this pivotal moment where every day you turn on the news and there's another element of the climate crisis literally rearing its ugly head. St. Louis was underwater this week with historic horrific flooding, especially impacting communities of color, right? We saw last night, storm rolls through Las Vegas, disproportionately impacts the east side of Las Vegas. Fires up in northern Nevada, fires in northern California. The smoke is impacting renters who in northern Nevada, you have to keep your windows open because a lot of people don't have air conditioning. So what do those folks do, especially asthmatics and people with breathing problems? There's so many things happening all around this country and all around the world right now with this climate crisis. What is the true cost of doing nothing and not addressing this?
Great question, Annette. And I think it's a really difficult question, right? So we've got the dollar costs that we can tabulate on spreadsheets, but then we have the costs that we've been talking about all night long. Yeah. So the health costs and the inconvenience and the discomfort and the pain and suffering that come with those storms, with the diseases, with the heat, with the pollution. And then in addition, we have the costs. So what gives me hope, and the good news is that we know most of the solutions. We know what needs to be done. The challenge is it's going to cost a lot of upfront money to implement those. So if we're going to shift to solar power, to EVs, to mass transit, to rebuilding our communities so they're more people-centric instead of car-centric, like Mr. Reese said, all of that's going to require upfront capital. And it's hard to put a figure on all of that, but there was one study that came out, I think it was last year, that not doing anything will cost us nearly $200 trillion globally over the next few decades. And so even though it can be expensive to switch to solar and electric vehicles and energy efficiency, we can make up that by the savings and by the lowered healthcare costs and all of those benefits over time. And so the more we can do now, the softer our landing will be in the future. And I'm pleased as punch to hear Dr. Avery say that we actually have some money, and she was dropping links to talk about some of the money that's available for weatherization and energy efficiency upgrades, because those are some of the solutions we need.
Absolutely. Dr. Avery, I want to come back to you, and you've been dropping excellent resources in the chat. We are sharing those out with our community all across the state. So thank you for that. You were recently quoted in an article titled "Climate Change Means Mafia Victims No Longer Sleep with the Fishes." And I alluded to that earlier in all of the interesting things we've been finding in Lake Mead recently, which is funny and also horrifying because we're finding those things because, again, Lake Mead is drying up at a rapid pace. So you said we need to make sure that conservation efforts in Nevada are adopted more broadly. California is a bit behind us. What conservation efforts are we taking in the state of Nevada to address water resources amid our ongoing drought? And I do know, Governor Sisolak has been a real leader on this issue, but he's also been a real leader on renewable energy issues and other issues related to climate change. So talk to us about what the governor's office is doing and what we should be doing as Nevadans.
Right. Well, first of all, thank you. You guys, I was looking through the questions and everybody was talking. I was like, oh, I've got a link for that. So I wanted to be popping that in. And I think it is important to just realize that there are grants, there's things on the table at the federal level, and we're doing, we want to do what we can to get those resources deployed. I mean, just today, the governor was at Help of Southern Nevada and met with some of the clients that they serve for their weatherization program. And it was just really amazing to hear their stories and about how it's really changed their energy bills, and just the health impacts alone are just so profound and so important. In terms of, I know the zombie situation and Lake Mead, it's just, I was fairly flippant just saying, oh, well, it's an impact of climate change we didn't expect. This will be solving mob murders from way back in the day, so it's sometimes you have to have a little humor when you're dealing with issues as profound as water resources in the Southwest and climate change. It is true, though. Southern Nevada really has been a leader, not just in the U.S., but globally in terms of conservation and aggressive conservation. I just heard, Pat Mulroy, when she was the general manager of Southern Nevada Water Authority, 15, 20 years ago, she was saying, we need another intake at Lake Mead, and people thought she was crazy. Well, guess what? She was dead on. And the conservation, we've done a very good job, right? We can do better, and we will do better, and we have to do better. Right now, we use on average in Southern Nevada about 111 gallons per person per day. We need to get down to 86 gallons per person per day. And that's per the modeling of the Southern Nevada Water Authority, because they understand climate change and they understand the risks and they plan for it. And they have some fairly aggressive measures that they're pursuing. And so, for example, limiting pool sizes, no more golf courses, no more ornamental grass. There's a lot that they're doing. And now we're getting into the place where the easy fixes, they've been done. So now we need to get into the things that are going to be lifestyle changes. And that's across the board with climate change. And it is going to impact us and how we do things. And I saw upwards in the chat, somebody was commenting on social scientists and economists and those roles. Absolutely. Behavioral change this is about us. The science is clear. It's told us, but there hasn't, it's about us and our collective will to change. But it's not just personal action, quite frankly. It is about moving markets. It's about changing the industrial complex of how we truly, what's there and what's available and moving forward. And so there's a tremendous opportunity. But with respect to Southern California, I just find it really disappointing. Average water use in the state of California is somewhere around 80 gallons per person per day. And I said we're at about 111. The thing is, up north, it's more like 40 gallons per person per day. Southern California, like Riverside, it's like 140, something like that. So, there's definitely an imbalance. And there was just a desal plant that was not approved by the California Coastal Commission in Huntington Beach. And some of the narrative was, well, we have enough water in Southern California. And that to me is just, it doesn't necessarily look like a desert to them. But I'll tell you, come out to Lake Mead and tell me you don't have a problem. And it clearly, there's a messaging of people don't understand where their water comes from over there. But we do. We get it. And we always have.
Yeah, we've lived this our entire lives. We've been told this. I was taught this in elementary school, that there was a finite amount of water and that we were living in a desert. And, I think even the water district ads with, Ryan Reeves and other folks, it's educated us and really drilled into us down here that it is a desert out here and we have a finite resource that we have to protect. And so I know Southern Nevadans get it, but it is unfortunate that other folks around us still don't get it yet. Dr. Avery, one last question for you. I saw an article this week that said that Las Vegas is the most impacted city by climate change currently, and it is the fastest warming city in the country, even though we're already hot. As we see rising temperatures in Las Vegas and in Reno, because we are seeing it in Northern Nevada as well, what does this mean for our workers? For example, construction workers are often outside. In Las Vegas, this means they're exposed to temperatures as high as 117, 120 degrees, depending on the day, probably more if they're on asphalt or don't have trees around them. With that type of heat becoming more and more common, what can we do to help mitigate the impact of rising temperatures on our workers and our workforce across the state?
That is such a good question. And, there's a couple of things. I'll point out one thing I put into the chat that the White House announced last week is, highlighted because it is something that's going on, is that OSHA at the federal level, they're adopting heat regulations for workers. And so that's one thing I would just highlight that is in process. And I think one of the things that I would also point out is heat is not just an issue in Las Vegas. It is an issue in Reno as well. So Reno, Las Vegas arguably battle for I don't know if it's the top or the bottom, if you say fastest warming cities in the US, but it is because of the urban heat island. It's compounded by climate change. And so this is an issue in both places. And I think it's just, when you see 115 on the thermometer here, or 122, but we need to be thinking about it up north too, particularly when we're thinking about our homeless populations. There's been, fortunately, a lot of discussion, and not just admiring the problem, but movement in terms of figuring out what really needs to be done. I think what we've learned is that the resources that are available for heat, whether you're talking about how to get to cooling stations or where cooling stations might be open in Southern Nevada, and it's all disparate and it's all over the place. And so the governor convened a group of folks, and we had a couple-hour workshop of who's doing what. We just lay everything out on the table. Okay, Weather Service, what are you doing? Clark County, what are you doing? The libraries in Southern Nevada operate as cooling centers. So there's a huge partnership that needs to be built, and the All in Clark County effort is really working on that City of Las Vegas has an effort on that. So I think this is one of those where we need to figure out who's doing what. So that way we're not duplicating efforts, and that we're doing the best that we can to really harmonize what we're doing together. And that's something that we're working on at the state level under the governor's statewide heat plan, which right now it is fact finding. It is not. We have a Living with Fire program for smoke. We don't have a Living with Heat. We don't have anything like that quite yet. We need to figure out how we pull that together.
Yeah, and it's interesting you say that, because Brenda in the chat asks you specifically if the governor's office has any resources in Spanish for those who are facing extreme heat, like construction workers. And I think as y'all are developing those resources, developing them in all languages is going to be so incredibly important, not just to our Latino community, but also for our APIA community and various other communities across the state too. Yeah. Cindy, I want to bring you back in. So as we start to wrap up the show, how can people get involved in the work you all are doing at Make the Road Nevada? And what do we need to do to help support important projects like the decarbonization report we talked about earlier that our coalition Breathe Free Nevada is put out? And it's in the chat for everyone. So take a look at it. We posted an article too from KTNV about the article, or about the report as well. So Cynthia, how do folks get involved with you, and what should folks be doing?
Yeah, thank you for posting the link to the report. If people want to take a look at the report for themselves, they should read it. Also, the website breathefreenevada.com has some really great tools. I'm just like Brian, I love maps. And I'm constantly looking at maps, especially when it comes to the urban heat island. And not surprisingly, I live in the area that is being affected the most by the urban heat island. The other thing that people can do as far as getting involved with Make the Road is that we have an environmental justice committee that meets once a month on a Tuesday. And if you're interested in being part of this committee, you can find more information on our website, maketheroadnv.org. And I encourage you to attend. We love hearing from people, different ideas. And we also learn how the heat and climate change is taking a toll on our community, because my experience may be completely different from someone else. So I encourage you to join our committee. We would love to have you.
Awesome. And we will put the link in the chat to get involved with Make the Road Nevada. They're one of our amazing community partners that we work with all the time. And they do incredible work, especially in the Latino community. So please get involved with them, and we'll put the link in the chat for their good work. Brian, I want to come to you. Final word. I'm going to kind of combine two of the questions I had, because I think it's important as we wrap up. So talk to our audience about the role that conservation plays in addressing climate change, and how they can be a part of the change that is happening all across the state and across the country. And then how do folks get involved with the good work that Sierra Club is doing here in Nevada, and the work that you do every day?
Annette, thank you. And again, thanks for this conversation. So the good news is that, as I said earlier, we have the solutions. We just need to implement and scale them. And some of these have been talked about earlier. everything from tracking our emissions. If you don't measure it, you can't manage it. And so I kudos to Reno for tracking fire engines and police emissions and building emissions. We were talking about energy efficient buildings and appliances that use less energy. There are state programs that do retrofits for older buildings and for to help people struggling with energy bills get better insulation, better windows, and more efficient appliances, so they're using less energy to begin with. And all of these things can be expanded. We can also do a better job at designing our communities, as Mr. Reese said, to be more people-centric instead of car-centric. So we don't need as many cars. And it's tough because we here in the West, our communities were designed around the car. And so it's time for us to start thinking differently. And there's 100 things that we can each do independently, whether it's, reusing shopping bags and utensils and saying no to single-use plastics. And also we need systemic change. So we need our elected leaders at every level to implement policies that can scale all of these solutions. And on that topic, I'll say Nevada, there's a lot of work that needs to be done, but we have amazing politicians in office. So our legislature and the Assembly, the Senate, the governor's office, the Washoe, Clark County commissions, they're all doing, the Reno City Council, they're all doing really great work. The governor's office doing really great work to push these answers, and we need to keep them in office, folks. So elections are coming in November. You got to vote for the climate. And to your last question, yes, please. Sierra Club is powered by volunteers, and we do work across all of these fronts. And I just dropped a link in the chat for our volunteer link. And so if you can just sign up there, and then we'll be in touch, and we would love to work with all of you to create a better future.
Absolutely. Thank you, Brian. And thank you to everyone who joined us tonight. We have such amazing advocates who were able to join us this evening, and we could not do this work without every single one of them. I want to thank Chief McNamara. I can't even say that. I've been in interviews all day, folks, so it's just been back to back today. So I want to thank the Chief from Reno. I want to thank Councilman Reese, Dr. Avery, Brian, Cynthia. Y'all are amazing. Thank you all for being here tonight. And thank you for the work that you do every single day to protect our climate and move us forward on this issue. Next week, we are going to be out in front talking about the Medicare and Medicaid anniversary that's happening on Sunday. It is the anniversary of Medicare and Medicaid in this country, and it's a critical time to be talking about that, because negotiations are happening in Congress right now on extensions and new things that we want to add to those programs. So we'll be back live next Thursday at 5 p.m. to talk about all of that. We will also be having a press conference on Monday with Congresswoman Dina Titus to talk about the anniversary as well. So make sure you tune in. It'll be on Monday morning on our Facebook page. We'd love to have you all join in for that as well. So join us next week. We'll be live at 5 on Battleborn Progress's Facebook and Twitter. Thank you to all of our speakers for staying over with us tonight and having this important conversation with us. And thank you all for tuning in as per usual. We appreciate all of our viewers. We'll talk to you next Thursday. Stay safe and healthy. And remember, COVID is still a very real thing. Thanks, everyone. Have a great evening. Thanks for staying over, friends. I wanted to make sure we got everything in.
Thank you.
Have a great evening. Bye. Brian, you were excellent. Don't stress.